Now on NPR that we found out just went live today. We haven't heard it yet. So we literally got that note right before this meeting started, but excited it was a joint interview on Here and Now of Dr. Gilboa and myself. Really excited for that. It came from the AP article that was out. Thank you so much, Rick, for getting that sort of up and moving there. But excited to see an interest and a pickup in people outside the toy industry starting to want to understand kind of what we're doing and what's the goal and what's the plan overall. So super excited about that. Thank you. Okay, so let's jump into today's topic. So interestingly, as we've been talking through all the different pieces of research that were part of the compilation that led to us to create the idea behind these, eight skills and 4 play patterns and the whole development of the mesh platform, there's one piece of research that I certainly have gotten the most questions on and the most interest in. And I usually talk about it when we come to talking about the idea of increasing challenges over the duration of play. And it is a piece of research from the National Institute of Health that they actually call the I don't want to grow up, I'm a Gen Z, Y, X kid. And it comes back to the idea that more than not, teenagers are expressing that they don't actually want to grow up. And that's a substantial shift from where we were. I know, at least for most of us on this call right now, most likely, I was desperate to grow up when I was 14. All I wanted was my driver's license, and I wanted to be able to go out with my friends. And so it's a really big shift that I think has happened overall. And this was just a really fantastic piece of research that dug into the reasons why. And the one sentence version that I usually talk about, from having really worked with Dr. Gilboa about what this means, is the idea that when you look at all the reasons why, it comes down to this idea that adulting looks hard. It looks challenging, and rather than wanting to embrace that challenge and getting excited about that challenge, it's become I don't really want to do that. And so I wanted to come together today and really have a chance for Dr. G to talk to the group about why that would be. What is it about this specific report that's resonating with people and causing a lot of questions, and how that led or builds in the mesh world that we've been pulling together. So Dr. G, I will pass it off to you to really dig into this one, as I've gotten a ton of feedback and questions on it.
Yeah, and I wanted to, Rachel and I had talked about how I'm going to talk to you for about 3 or 4 minutes about this, but then bring your questions. Let's have a conversation. It struck me while you were talking, Rachel, that it might be funny to say, why would toy industry folks want to help kids grow up? Because, more kids, more customers.
Sure.
But
Sure.
the truth is, what we're seeing in this, and so the research started in 1982. They asked undergraduate age people who might have been in the military, might have been in university, or just working a job after high school, but people who were 18 to 22 years old, about their interest in, fears about, excitement for becoming an adult. And they did it every 10 years through 2012. And another study that was also reviewed in that same piece of literature that we're referencing was a different study of women who were in that same 18 to 22-year-old age range in 2001, 3, 9, and 12. So all this ended in 2012, and what they see is a pattern. And that pattern is, and I'm going to age myself here, not Rachel, is that for those of us who were kids or teens in the 80s, we were in general, for the most part, as a group, pretty motivated to be grown-ups, pretty excited, wanted the autonomy. We're focused on, when we thought about adulthood, the autonomy and the freedom, and not so much the difficulty or the obligation. And that has really shifted. And Rachel, you talked about a really good specific example. You said, when I was a teenager, I couldn't wait to get my driver's license, et cetera. So numbers of kids at 16, 17, and 18 who are going for their driver's license is dropping substantially. Different research, not in this study, but really noteworthy in the last 20 years, not only in urban settings. And you might think urban kids, they couldn't have a car anyway. There's nowhere to park. They're just going to take public transportation. And if you're growing up in New York City, I agree. Even as an adult, I would sell my car. But this turns out to be true rural and suburban, that kids are less willing to take on the responsibilities of being a driver. And when we ask them why, they're not citing financial issues. They're not citing, I'm too busy. They're saying 2 things. One, I don't want the risk and responsibility, right? So for privileged kids, my parents will drive me. Why wouldn't I just want to be on my phone or doing whatever while I get driven places? And the other thing that we're hearing from pretty much all kids who are putting it off is anxiety about the accountability and the responsibility. Like, what if I hurt somebody? What if I could get hurt? It just seems hard, to your point. And so that's one of the places that the play pattern of increasing challenge over the duration of play. Rachel, when you and I are interviewed about this, we tend to talk about frustration tolerance, and we don't talk about another major benefit, which is confidence building. Increasing challenge over the duration of play does build frustration tolerance, and it's incredibly important. And I mean, every person you see behaving badly in the world, you wish they had more frustration tolerance. Whether they're getting on an airplane with you or they're at the grocery store checkout behind you, you just wish everybody could tolerate a little more frustration without behaving badly. But we also need kids to grow their confidence. And really interesting research teaches us that kids grow long-lasting confidence, not when they are praised, but when they build competence. So praise, I'm going to talk about it for just 30 seconds. Praise, you all like kids. If you're at the grocery store and there's an adorable 3-year-old in the cart in front of you, you might smile at that kid, right? They're facing you, not where the way their grown-ups facing. You might smile at that kid. You might talk about their cool light up shoes, or just give them a thumbs up, or like do a peekaboo, or talk to them for a minute about, boy, you're such a good helper, whatever it is, right? And any compliment that you give that child, I like your shoes, you have such curly hair, whatever it is, that builds connection. When we praise somebody, Amy, you and I have never met, but if I right now say to you, and it's true, that shirt's great, right? It's so fun and also really flattering and really fun. That builds a little connection between us if what I'm saying is authentic and you hear it as authentic. And the next time you go to put it on, or tonight when you're taking it off, you might think, that was cool. I liked when Dr. G said that. But it doesn't build your confidence, it builds our connection. If we want to build confidence with praise, we have to praise something the person did, not something they have, or even something they are. So if I say to a kid, you're smart, you've got a great singing voice, you're such a good athlete, I'm praising something they are. And it turns out that doesn't build confidence either. As a matter of fact, it often builds imposter syndrome. Well, you just haven't met my friend who's faster than me, or you haven't, there are kids in my math class who are definitely smarter than me. Because elementary schoolers start to compare themselves to their peers, that only gets worse in middle school, that internal comparisons. You still build connection. You noticed me, you noticed that being an athlete's important to me. I feel that connection. But if you want to build my confidence, you have to compliment me about something I can control. You have to praise something I can control. Like, I saw you talking to your other teammates and I thought that communication was amazing. Or I listened to you sing. You must have practiced a lot. Your perseverance really showed. So when we build confidence in kids, that helps them think, I see the advantages of growing up and I might be equal to the task. When we build competence in them, we don't have to meet them to build confidence. So as a toy retailer or a toy maker or a games creator, you don't have to meet a child to build their competence. And building competence in kids always leads to confidence. Building confidence makes them more likely, along with frustration tolerance, to believe they can handle being an adult. So those things that build increasing challenge over the duration of play and problem solving, less so actually with storytelling or playing with adults, because not all adults build confidence and competence. But those two, problem solving, the two actually that like ThinkFun games really do, of building problem solving and increasing challenge over the duration of play, those build competence in kids, competence that they themselves recognize. That leads to confidence. I talked for more than 4 minutes. Sorry. Rachel's not shocked.
Not shocked. But it's interesting because this is so one of the big questions that I had as we've gone through this, and I don't know if we have the answer to this, but is it for those of us again who were teenagers in the 80s and who were like, totally into the idea of growing up because it was freedom. Like that was the whole piece, right?
That
And
the ideal would be if your parents moved out. So you still had the house,
right,
and
exactly.
obviously
And
the
the
food
food
would just
supply.
magically appear,
Yeah.
and the heat and
Yeah.
water would just magically appear. You just get rid of those adults.
Right, exactly. But the interesting to me is to also, is it because we teach our kids more about like the perils of the world, or is it because they see more than we did through social media, or
No,
what
because
what's the change?
if you look back at the people who came to adulthood in the 60s and 70s and 80s, nobody could argue that they didn't know about the perils of the world, right? They
Yeah.
were protesting Vietnam, that right, like we've not hidden it from. Now, do I think that kids are more globally minded now than they used to be? Yes. And that seems to be part of, maybe at least an association, if not a causation, in a rise in some anxieties about the world. But actually, I would flip the script and I would say that the reason, and there is some research to show this, but no direct causation research that I found so far, that we have been showing our kids as they've been growing up for 2 generations now that we don't have confidence in their competence to navigate the world. And one of the biggest, I would lay the blame for a lot of that on tracking apps. So somewhere between 1985 and 2005, we went from, Rick, finish this sentence, no news is
Good news.
good news, to no news means you're definitely dead. Right. So I'm old enough, and I think you are, Rachel, Rick is, to have grown up with no news is good news. Like, oh, your kid's been away for 3 days at that thing. How are they doing? No news is good news. Right.
Yeah. Good
To
point.
like, my kid didn't call me when they got in my friend's car, like an adult's car from A to B. They didn't call me when they got to B. I'm so worried I have to get off this work call because I haven't heard from them and I'm so scared. And what if something happened?
Yes.
And so tracking apps, listen, so I rail on national television against tracking apps, and I don't do it because they don't work, and they don't. Tracking apps have not ever been proven to make kids safer. They don't save kids' lives. So if they just didn't make kids safer, I'd say whatever, it's like vitamins, they don't actually make a difference, but no harm, no foul. Your pee gets really expensive. Okay. If they were only bad for adults, and they are bad for adults, they increase parents' hypervigilance and anxiety and decrease their feeling of connection with their kids. So if they were only bad for adults, then I would say, okay, it's like alcohol. You're an adult, you decide. But they're actually bad for kids also. They build kids' anxiety and decrease their confidence in their own ability to navigate the world without their parent in their pocket. And so as we teach kids, you're not safe if I don't know where you are. And if I can't get in touch with you 24/7, they believe us.
Wow.
Can I add to that? One
Yeah.
is everybody wants to wear an Apple Watch now. So, it's pretty tough to, we started with phones. Please don't take it on the sales floor. You got a job to do. If there's an emergency, just have them call the store.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to send you on your way or get you taken care of and all that. But as time has gone on, got to tell time. I got to take emails. I tell you what, our bathroom visits are way up. Okay. Everybody has to go to the bathroom a lot more
A
these days.
lot of urinary tract infections on your staff, right?
Time of month, whatever, there is sewer clean out has to be done because there's some connection there. But anyway, my question of what you described, Dr. G, is you were talking about children and kids. Would the same hold true with young adults or middle-aged adults as well? So when we deal with our teams on the store sales floor, how do we build their confidence in discussing these things with, customers, all that? Is it when you see them doing something well, or that the person gave feedback that they had done a good job and thanked them? Are those the places to give that reinforcement, or will there be others?
So catching them doing good is a great leadership strategy for sure, but there's something else you can do, Rick, that works faster in adults to build their confidence in their own competence. And that is turning to them as an expert. So when you have a team meeting and you say, hey, we're introducing this new product, going to your frontline salespeople and saying, take it in your hands, play with it. What do you think our customers will value about this? You know them better than I do because you talked to them yesterday and I only talked to them last week. And so when you point out their expertise and you meet it with your own expertise in the product, in the time of year, in the seasons, in the, you know, in the pattern of how things work when you've got a ring at the cash register, it's not that you put yourself lower. You just say, I have this expertise and I want you to meet me with yours. That makes a really big difference.
Okay, good. But adults can do the same learning and things that you described in children. Competence
They're
versus
just harder nuts to crack because adults who've convinced themselves that they're not competent at something, you could tell them 16 different ways and they will have excuses in their head why they fooled you, not that they're actually competent.
Thank you.
So this is really interesting. And speaking as a parent of 3 kids who tracks all of them and having that moment of like, wow, it never occurred to me that me tracking them, and actually they track us, they track myself and my husband.
Different thing. That's an adult to adult
Right.
thing. Your decision.
Yeah, completely. But like the idea that it would be that they think it's because we aren't confident in them makes me look at so many areas where I've done things for my kids, honestly, because either it's easier in the moment or because I think I'm being super helpful, right? Like I feel like I'm coaching them through something when in reality I'm just sort of giving them solutions they need to do versus encouraging them to figure it out.
And I do this with my kids too. And I think that it's not only that they think that they're not confident, it's that we think the world is so risky.
Yeah.
Right? Because, and also transparently, maybe we do think that more. The 24-hour, and Rick, you could probably give us some generational perspective because the 24-hour cable news cycle caused us to be aware of more granular bad things happening in the world. Right. So do you remember the kid that went down the well and the whole nation watched?
Of course.
That was the first live 24-hour news about a crisis ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think back to the 60s when I was in middle school or elementary going into high school, and you mentioned the Vietnam War. The things that we were getting were, 3 days to a week later than what things happened. And things like, Woodstock that turned out to be a historical event, we saw that a couple days later as a mud field, so there wasn't this intense buildup. You knew of it. People didn't discuss it as much either. It just wasn't something that our parents talked to us a lot about. They would sit down and watch the nightly news for 30 minutes as, viewership there was so high. But there wasn't a dialogue like today. I see kids talking about these things from the Taylor Swift football effect to, the war overseas, to Ukraine, to, Congress. So this discussion point is a big difference that I see, that
and it's visual. You're not just hearing about it, you're seeing it, and that changes things. And I think, Rachel, to the point of tracking kids, I think a lot of parents would say, oh, I have confidence in my own kid, but I don't have confidence that their teacher will be able to hear them about that, or that event that they're going to won't have protesters at it.
Yeah, really interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
But that is not how kids take things in, because they take things in that everything is all about them. And so because of that, developmentally, psychologists call it self-centering. And we have negative connotations around being self-centered, but it is developmentally appropriate for kids in puberty, which mind you is age 9 to about age 16 or 17, to be self-centered and to take everything through the lens of, what does that mean about me? What does that say about me? That must be because of me. And therefore, when we say to our kids, you can go to that concert, but you have to leave, you have to turn on your tracking, or you have to call me every half hour or whatever. They think that's about them, and not because that there have been protests at that stadium, or there's something you saw planned online. And they just don't get as many opportunities to practice navigating something and telling us about it afterwards, even if we don't track them. In 1995, a study showed that adults between the ages of 18 and 22 were in touch with their parents on average once a week. And that in 2015, adults between the ages of 18 and 22 were in touch with their parents an average of 13 times a week. None of us would be surprised if that's gone up in the last 8 years. And what that means is that you tell your parent before you do something or while you're navigating it, instead of telling them the story afterwards. And so it just gives you less chance to try it and mess it up and see that you can live through messing it up.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So how do we change the narrative around the idea of challenge being negative? One of the things I found even with my own children is when they face something that looks like a challenge, instead of being like, all right, let's go kill that, right? They're like, oh God, that I don't think that's a good idea. Or because my kids, just went through teenage years, they're more like, that's stupid. I don't want to do that.
There's three different things. There's three different things adults can do. One, we can talk about our own challenges. Tell the stories of our big mess ups, our sideways, let our kids laugh with us or at us a little bit in a respectful way. So we can talk about just to say like, and I'm still standing, right? Like that's the underlying message. So that's one thing. We can talk about the things in our current lives too, not just like, oh, when I was your age kind of stuff. Because when did an adult ever tell a story of, oh, well, when I was your age, that you were really open and excited to hear? So the second thing that we can do is to greet challenge with excitement with them. Like, wow, that assignment sounds like it's going to be really challenging. I'm so excited to see what you'll do.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like I'm really glad that your math homework is getting harder for you because I see you growing. And the third is to use when, not if language about them failing at a challenge. So I have time for this quick story. When I take little kids or even medium-sized kids out to go to a baseball game or do something that's like a field trip, but they're my own kids, so you don't call it that. I always say, when you get lost, what will you do? Not if you get lost, when you get lost. And when my kids have gotten lost, like one time at the baseball game where they were 5 and 7, completely got lost. Security called me. They were down eating candy in the security office because they found a security guard. When I walked in and the security guards were like, they were so brave. They didn't cry. They were so comfortable. How did you do that? Before I could say anything, my 5-year-old said, oh, she told us this would happen. When we use when language, and this is true of adults too, Rick, when we say, when you forget to price that, or when you don't do this, when you make a mistake, basically is the underlying message, when this thing goes wrong, when we have a fire in the store, what our brain hears is, this is a step in a sequence and something was supposed to happen next. They may not remember what it was, but they remember that something is, but when we use if language, if this happens, we hear that as a screw up, as a failure, as something to either avoid or cover up or hide or run from. So saying to our kids, when you fail a test in high school, or when you sleep through a class, or when you tell a friend's secret, or when you lie to me, even though for adults that can feel really counterintuitive, our kids are not hearing, you're a terrible person. They're hearing, oh, you know that kind of stuff happens. And when it happens, and it might not. And by the way, research shows that if it doesn't happen, they don't think you're a terrible adult. They think they're a rock star kid. Nobody comes back to the van and is like, well, you're a terrible leader. You said we'd all get lost. They say, I'm so fantastic. I didn't even get lost. So don't worry about that part. But it really shows that when that thing happens, whether they remember what they were supposed to do next or not, they remember that something was supposed to happen next.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it.
I got a question. So going back to like the tracking app, I think you touched on it a little bit like when that happens, right? I got a stepson, and he's going out and telling him, hey, well, I'm going to put you on the tracking app. Would it be good, I guess, to communicate as a caregiver in the way of like communicating your feelings about the app and like why you have it, and saying, hey, this isn't for you because I don't trust you. It's because I was once a teenage boy, and I did these things, and it's really just for peace of mind. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
I totally understand what you're saying, and I do want you to have a why, but I also want you to have an exit strategy, Arturo. So let's say he's 15. I want you to say, this is your opportunity to build my trust, show me you're a better kid than I was, because by the time you're 16, I want to stop tracking when you go out. And I only want to track you after you're 16 if you mess it up and lose the privilege of not being tracked. So I've used tracking with my kids, but I've done it as a consequence for bad behavior. And it's been like grounding, right? Like you're grounded for 2 weeks and I'm tracking you for 2 weeks after that while you build my trust back up. So, because I was on The Doctors, which is this national daytime show, and they had me on to talk about this. And they brought on a mom who was like talking about her kids who were a freshman and a junior and how she tracked them. And they were getting really salty about it. Yeah, they were a freshman and a junior at Stanford.
Oh, oh,
right?
God.
Like, and everybody in the audience did what Rachel just did. Like, I understand why are they getting so salty? And then I was like, and they go to, and she said, Stanford University, and she's very proud of them. And I was like, and that's awesome. But can you start to see how these adults and everybody in the audience was like, oh, when do you stop? So having an exit strategy. So if he's 17, saying to him, you know what, I've been tracking you. Now it's time for you to start to earn my trust without me tracking you. And here are the parameters. And I will go back to tracking you in a New York minute if this, or this happens. Son that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And I was also thinking too, because I don't use tracking apps for my son or any of my kids, but I was also just thinking how, I guess that's applicable to any scenario.
Yeah. Listen, I think that middle schoolers should not have access to their own social media stuff. And that's really extreme in the other way of like hyper vigilant parenting, right? I want them to have access actually in middle school, sharing an account with you, like sharing your Pinterest or your Instagram or your TikTok or whatever, so that they know they're on yours. And if they want to create content, that's fine. And if they want to look around, that's fine, but it's together. And then when they get to 13 or 14, they start to earn the privilege of getting off of your account, getting on their own account. And we think about how they use it and we talk to them about it. But eventually, like as soon as they're out of our house, whatever draws them out of our house, whether it's the military or university or a job or anything, we got nothing, no control at all. And so they need practice navigating it without us sitting on their shoulder so that when they mess it up, we can dial it back a little bit, talk it through, handle the consequences, as opposed to them being out and gone the first time they get to try it.
So as a toy manufacturer, as what we're talking about today, I'm thinking about 3 different approaches in my head. Would be, one, something for like the caregiver, because I think there's education for that for, not just teens, but younger individuals. And then also for just the teens themselves would be, the approach of somebody who doesn't have any confidence or competence. So you really got to approach that differently and be more focused, I think, and dialed in on the toy that you're creating for that aspect. And then something that's a little bit more broad for individuals who are not as risk avert and are open to like trying something new, a game where they can learn these new skill sets.
Which is why that play pattern of things that get harder as you play is so great, because you can build a little confidence by them just trying something new that isn't that much of a challenge. Otherwise, the second time they do it, it'll be easy. But the very first time, that's still hard. New is hard. And then do that, play that level as long as you want. But when you're ready, we know you could try this.
The trick will be somebody who's, really risk avert, and everybody with like attention spans, it's really short these days, even adults included, but like is getting them on board with these types of games that'll give them these new skill sets. I think that's going to be the trickier one.
I think that also we have some bridges. There are already toys and games that build each of these play patterns.
Yeah.
So showing them, hey, you already like to do this. This is a new thing that'll do the exact same, like you'll enjoy it just as much, if not more. And within the game itself, if you have an opportunity, for example, to collect badges, like physical little badges or little buttons or little plastic things or whatever, but you can only put it on your character, on your little figure after you've achieved that level. There's something about our brains that likes to complete patterns. So we want to get all the different badges.
Yeah.
Quick one, Dr. G and Rachel. A lot of people I talk to now, they just, if they can't figure it out, they immediately Google it, YouTube it, try to learn it, and then go from there. I'm not quite there yet. I sit there and my wife laughs at me and I try to just figure it out and keep going over, look at the instructions, complain, throw the stuff away and get mad and say, you know, these directions, geez, who the heck and wrote
You're
that?
managing that frustration really well, Rick.
Yeah. Well, as I have a Topo Chico. But is that a help or a hindrance to what we're talking about? Do you encourage that? Is it's going to be there, but has that had any effect on just being able to dial it up, take a look, and let's move on?
Have you seen, Rick, the meme online that says, shout out to all my math teachers who told me, well, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket?
Yeah.
And now we all have calculators in our pocket all the time.
True.
I'm not bothered. There's really no research that shows that how you try to solve the problem or which tool you bring to bear weakens you in some way, except, mommy, you do it. Because you won't always have mommy in your pocket. But if what you're going to do is ask someone else, that builds connections, which has been shown to build resilience. If you're going to use a strategy that's usually successful for you, like, do I think it's fun to say, hey, let's turn off the Wi-Fi password and now try and solve that problem, just in case, you know, Armageddon comes, sweetheart, and you don't always have access to YouTube, but somebody will hack their way back in.
Okay. No, good.
Yeah.
Good.
So on that topic, though, I feel, and this is my personal opinion on that, like that builds false confidence, I guess, because there are a lot of individuals who will just echo like a headline, or, you know, if they say they're going to learn something.
Be savvy consumer. This isn't like YouTubing, how do I change a tire? This is YouTubing, what do I think about the new Speaker of the House, right? Or what do I believe about Santa or something? So I agree with you that asking kids to be savvy consumers of other people's opinions, fact checking, looking at reputable sources, and schools, by the way, have been really adding that into their curriculum for 10 years or more. And so a lot of kids are gaining those skills at school, but they forget to use them at home. So when they're with their friends and they watch an influencer that says like, well, the in fashion is to cut all your clothes in half and tie them together. And then suddenly you find your kid has cut all their clothes in half and their friends are like, you look like an idiot. What are you doing? Or their school is like, you can't wear that to school. Then yeah, we wanted them to be savvy consumers.
There's a game in there somewhere about like fact
checking.
Yeah.
All right, do you think we have to wrap this up? I know we're a little bit over. Thank you guys so much for your time and for sticking with us. Our goal is to run these once a month on just different topics that are, again, sort of part of this mesh platform or what we're learning and discovering about as we are digging more and more into the research all the way around. So thank you guys very, very much. And we will see you again next month.